Good night, everyone. Good night, everyone. Alternate views. Key my short here. Want to say how happy I am to have you um, this evening. This evening, a lot is happening. So, we had to make the appropriate changes to fit in this evening session. But we apologize for the late start. But nevertheless, we are here and we are ready. Just let us know how's the volume. Let me know if you can hear me well. Let me know if you can see me well. And let us have a very good discussion this evening. Alternate views. Welcome to the program. Yet another Thursday. Good night to you all. So far, we have 13 persons. So we want to encourage you to like and share, this evening, what is happening is the National Symposium on Crime, and we want to divert some of the attention there as well, that we can hear some of the panelists. We have um, persons like Marcia Weeks on the panel. We have Dr. Derek Allen. We have Lumumba Batson. We have Winston Easton Branch, I believe. And we have some other persons on the panel uh, speaking to crime. The moderator is Rosemary Allen, I believe. So a couple of the viewers might be on there watching that. So we want to encourage you to tune into that as well, to if you could. But tonight we are having a very mellow show. Tonight we want to discuss like we want to discuss uh, a very mellow personality tonight. But along the way, we're going to reference uh, the National Symposium on Crime, and we're going to try to show some clips from the symposium, providing that the technology works with us and providing that it holds up. And we will show some footage from the National Symposium uh, on online alternative views this evening. So, we did not advertise this week. We had a show on Tuesday, which was a very good show. We had the director of the Caribbean Progress Studies Institute on our last show, which was on Tuesday, and that was a very good show. We had some thorough analysis. We had some deep thoughts. We had some hard-hitting jabs from economist Rasheed Griffith on the program last Tuesday, not even last week, but last Tuesday. We don't really stream on the Tuesdays, but we had to do a special show given the urgency of the topic. So we took the time out to do that urgent show, and it went very well. So I thank you all for tuning in on Tuesday. We might consider hosting a program uh, every other Tuesday, maybe to help facilitate some of the persons who could not be on the Thursday, to help uh, broaden our scope, to help engage more persons, to help get the message out, and basically to help build the show and build the audience, and to help other persons get access to the information that is on the show. Because the same way you benefit, I'm sure that your friends and family and daughters and nieces and nephews as well would like to benefit from it. So we would try to broadcast more often if we could. But given that I do have other jobs and priorities, time permitting, um, we will see how that goes. But welcome to you all. Welcome to you all. Good night. Good night. Good night. Um, Let me just acknowledge those persons who are on this evening. Patrick Green, saying greetings and salutations. We have Judrop Waldron saying ready for alternate views, ready for real views. Lemuel Toe, good night to you, Lemuel. Brian's V 1968, Square 4. Thank you very much. Ground raising to all and the cohort. FX Trading BB saying good night, everyone. So welcome to you all. Welcome to you all. Hey, Square 4 is saying that people think Thursday night is short, is too short. Well, depending on how the discussion goes, we do extend the time, but we try to stay disciplined because we don't want to overdo, we don't want to go overboard and not overindulge with the information. So we try to stay disciplined with the time that we spend with the viewers to ensure that we don't go into overkill. So, but once the conversation is going very vibrant, we do tend to extend. We also want to stay disciplined before. But thank you very much. That shows that the show is growing in popularity. That shows that the show uh, has something to offer to the population, and therefore the viewers are tuning in to garner information that means something to them. So, Hurricane Writer, good evening to you. He's saying good night to everyone. Good night to you, sir, and welcome to Alternate Views. I'm an avid supporter of the program. Just a reminder that the National Symposium on Crime is currently being streamed live on YouTube. So for those persons who, we just offer the reminder. At some point in time along our show, we're going to try to get some of the clips from the symposium featured online once the technology permits, as was said earlier. But tonight, I want to discuss an autobiography by Sir Lloyd Sandiford, former Prime Minister of Barbados, and it is called Fighting for the Just Society. And basically, this is what the publication will look like for those persons who may be interested. This is what the publication looks like. It is called Fighting for the Just Society. And today's symposium would speak to a fight for a just society and ensuring that crime and violence does not plague Barbados' fortunes. As was said by former prime ministers, Barbados is not just an economy, but it's also a society. And we need to have a just and fair society as it relates to crime and other issues. And therefore, we extend the acknowledgement to those persons who will attempt to find solutions, and therefore we applaud the National Symposium on Crime that is happening as we speak. Right. Sir Lloyd Sandiford, former Prime Minister of Barbados, a Prime Minister who also entered into an IMF program during the 1990s. He would have been famous for the 8% cut to public servant salaries, and then the famous no confidence motion, which led to eventually a change in government. So, on page 26 of this memoir or autobiography by Sir Lloyd Sandiford, it is saying that his contribution to the economy, that Sir Lloyd defined an economy as coordinating systems in a country, including the institutions, networks, and arrangements that allocate scarce resources for the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services, and that harmonizes the actions of the principal decision makers involved in those tasks through market and non-market forces. He adds that a stable economy is one with relative equilibrium or limited fluctuations in prices, employment, and production, and that exhibits economic growth and acceptable levels of employment. And he further adds that an economy goes into recession when it experiences a significant downturn, in economic activity, indicated by approximately two consecutive quarters of failing GDP, generally reflected in such indicators as real income, employment, production, and sales. Hey, Barbados at this point has realized, and this is before COVID, by the way, 8 consecutive periods of economic decline before COVID. And then we had almost a 19% decline or so, no, figure may not be totally accurate, but we had a massive decline in economic activity during COVID, and we had a massive decline in incomes for the average Barbadian, given the rapid increases of prices. So the income that you take home, the discretionary income that you take home after taxes, and then the prices in the supermarkets and for other goods, the real income or the spending power of the average Barbadian is being cut. Employment, I have not seen any areas of employment in Barbados which showed us any growth industries which provided sustainable job growth in any industry whatsoever. Um, so that one, production, Barbados has not increased its productive capacities to the level that it is sustainable to function the country on. Um, our productive capacities in agriculture is still very minuscule and measly. We're having one of the worst periods of agricultural development ever in the history of Barbados. But bear in mind that agriculture was the only sector to grow during COVID. Agriculture was the only sector to grow during COVID, but we're having a very overall measly agricultural development during this period. And sales, it seems to me that the sales of businesses, particularly some businesses, especially those businesses that the governments and the policymakers would favor, are tending to have favorable sales. So banks are continuing to make millions, insurance are making millions, the financial companies are making millions. Uh, so there are some winners generally in the economy, but overall sales for the average man and overall sales for small businesses tend to be down right now in Barbados. So Sir Lloyd states that between 1970 and 2010, that the Barbados economy experienced recessions on 5 occasions. So we went into recession 1974 to 1975. We had another recession in 1981 to 82, and then we had another recession in 1991 to 92. We had another recession in 2001 to 2, and then we had another recession in 2008 to 10. And remember that Sir Lloyd said that, in his opinion, a recession is where an economy declines 2 consecutive quarters. Right? So a financial quarter is 3 months. So every 4 months approximately is a financial quarter. Right? So for every 2 quarters, if you had negative growth, so Lloyd regards that as economy and recession, and Barbados had 8 before COVID, and Barbados had a massive decline after COVID. So what do you classify Barbados economy as? Economy in recession, because we have not achieved any uh, noted levels of growth, real growth that is, to substantiate otherwise. Right. So when I talk growth, because this is we're not just talking economics, we're talking life here now. Let's look at all of these sectors again. We had agriculture, we had tourism, um, we had health, we had housing, international business. But you could not put a finger on which particular sector would have had job growth in it, or you cannot put a specific finger on where job growth could have been developed in terms of a new industry. So therefore, how could you substantiate the claim of economic growth? Right? So, so Lloyd Sandiford is saying that under his leadership as Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs, that the Barbados economy reached its peak performance up to that time, which is around 1989. And he presented the facts clearly in an address on the 5th of December 1990, where he was given a political speech at my alma mater, which is the St. Michael's School. Right? And he provided the facts and substantiated the claims. But he then went on to say that the Barbados economy went on into a recession between 1991 to 92, and he explained that the world economy was in deep recession with severe fluctuations in prices, exchange rates, interest rates, inflation, and other volatility in the international markets. And Barbados' major trading partners, which were Canada, US, and United Kingdom, and we say that all of the time, have suffered heavily as a result, and little Barbados could not escape the adverse impact. Right? And these factors are still very much at play now. Right? So that segues into when the economy is not performing, you'll see situations like brewing crime, and that leads to opposition parties, meaning the current opposition parties having the National Symposium on Crime to be able to tackle the issue of gun violence in Barbados. We had 17 murders, including the one today, I believe, or that was last night. My volume, is my volume good now? Is my volume good now? Let me know if it's good. It's told that I'm getting a squeaking feedback. But let me know if my volume is clear. Let me know, please, in the comments. Let me know, please. Right. So I'll continue in the meantime. But Sir Lloyd Sandiford, former Prime Minister of Barbados, in his memoirs, we have the address of character and personality, which we spoke about extensively on this show, and leadership. He has a section on leadership. He spoke to contributions in education. He spoke to educational support services, contributions to the culture of Barbados, contributions to the infrastructure of Barbados, contributions to worker upliftment, contributions to tourism, contribution to the economy, contributions to regionalism, and he gave an explanation of the recession that he had to bear as Prime Minister during the time, the different economic reforms he had to implement, the Barbados IMF program between 1991 and 92, the IMF resources that Barbados gained access to during that period, and an assessment of the IMF program. He spoke to his contribution as a member of parliament for St. Michael South, his international experience as being appointed as ambassador to China, his official visits to the World Bank and IMF meetings, Commonwealth heads of government meetings, contributions to the financial institutional management, his hobbies, his honors, his membership, his research publications, and a leading and speaking to Barbados as a leading developing country, and a wish list for the medium and long term objectives of this country, a vision and the clarifying vision, and it's called putting purpose into life. Putting purpose into life. And you guys remember that we discussed purpose on this show heavily. We discussed knowing who you are, and we discussed Dr. Dennis Low's book about the psychosocial aspects of leadership and how that analysis of psychoanalysis could help propel a country forward if we know exactly who the persons are we're electing, and if these persons that we're electing know who they are as well and what Barbados means to them. So there you have former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford speaking to that. And as I said, tonight's discussion is about his memoir, speaking about fighting for the just society. And my reference tonight about fighting for a just society, a fair society, is to reference the National Symposium on Crime that is happening tonight at the Grand Salle at the Central Bank, where persons like Marcia Weeks, Lumumba Batson, Istanbul Winston, Dr. Derek Allen, and other panelists. Those are the type of discussions in terms of forming solutions and also ways to help govern society in a way that it feels safe for all. So the topic of fighting for a just society is very relevant today. And here you have persons on the front line fighting for a problem that mainly impacts the youth of the country, fighting for a problem that is bringing societal degradation, fighting against a problem that repels tourists from coming to Barbados, fighting for a problem that gives us a negative international reputation as being a gun-toting country, and also fighting against the threats to our families and to our households, where the scourge of gun violence can impact any of us at any moment. So you want to applaud the effort of trying to find a symposium. I have many different persons from different backgrounds to try to tackle this scourge. But in fighting for a just society, we want to speak about Barbados' previous IMF program under Sir Lloyd Sandiford. I want to remind you guys to like alternative views, to share alternative views, and to let us broadcast this information, because we're doing a comparison tonight between the previous IMF program and the current IMF program. So we would have extensively spoken about the current one, but let us give you a history lesson here from the former Prime Minister's memoirs, where he would have said that in 1991, Sir Lloyd placed before Parliament a well-focused program, which was the IMF program, that took into account the existing stabilization arrangements, and that also involved the four components of expenditure reduction based off government expenditure reduction, of wages and salaries cut, outlay on goods and services, current transfers to statutory bodies, capital expenditures, and capital transfers. These are, fancy technical terms. So you had revenue enhancement programs, which basically means increases in taxation. So we had a new consumption tax put on. We had taxes on petroleum products put on. We had reductions in import duties and stamp duties, and we had changes in what they called a stabilization tax at the time, and yields from levies through an increase in insurable earnings and surcharge on certain imports into the country. Right. So specific measures were put in place during that time. And the Barbados Economic Recovery Program, which sounds very familiar, right? You know the term BERT, the Barbados Economic and Recovery Transformation Program, BERT. That was also a figure of speech back in 1991 as well. So in that time, According to the Prime Minister's memoirs, Sir Lloyd Sandiford, the Barbados Economic Recovery Program included that one, there should be no devaluation of the Barbados dollar with the current fixed exchange rate of 2 to 1, which should be maintained and the cornerstone of Barbados' exchange rate policy. The developments of 1991 to 92 of an incomes policy based on a freeze in wages but with allowances for productivity bonus and profit sharing arrangements. The general freeze of basic wages and salaries in the public and private sector was formally signed by the social partnerships, the government workers, unions, and employer representatives under a protocol covering in 1993, April 1st to 3rd March 1995, and the protocol made exceptions of cases involving substandard wages, job evaluations or job enhancement exercises, profit sharing arrangements, and productivity bonus. Right. So these are things that are included in the BERT program of Sir Lloyd Sandiford. So included in that IMF program at that time was also the establishment of a national productivity board, which was by this current government that was shut down. The National Productivity Council was shut down. Right? So the National Productivity Board at that time, during the last IMF program, made up of representatives of government, employers, labor, and they were charged with the responsibility of encouraging and determining levels of productivity, as well as formulas and methods for measuring productivity. Right? So the National Productivity Council was shut down by this current government, but it was established under the administration of Sir Lloyd Sandiford under his IMF program, but was shut down under this current IMF program under Mayor Motley. They also had the policy of privatization and divestment for the promotion of economic enfranchisement and economic democracy. And the aim of this policy was to create opportunities for workers, cooperatives, credit unions, and individual investors to own a bigger stake in the economy and to encourage private companies to reorganize as public companies and to create more space for the private sector to generate greater efficiency and promote new investment. An office of privatization. An office of privatization was also set up at the time. And this office of privatization in the office of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs to identify state-owned enterprises for privatization, to process matters relating to privatization, and to generally manage the privatization program. So an office of privatization was set up under the former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford in his IMF experience. Under this current IMF experience, a direct office was not set up, but a structured program under the Ministry of Finance was set up. Even a survey was put out to determine which state-owned enterprises should or should not be privatized. So CBC is set to be privatized, Water Authority is set to be privatized, the BTMI was privatized, sanitation is set to be privatized, National Housing Corporation was tremendously scaled down, and a new government operation called the Hope Incorporated was established. Right? So you're saying that privatization has always been a big factor, and privatization was included always in the IMF program of 1991 to 92, and therefore privatization is back in these last two IMF programs, and in particular this last IMF program, which includes the Resilience and Sustainability Fund of the IMF, the RST. The two big ticket items on there is climate change and the continuous state-owned enterprise reform. Right? So it might not be a office as was done in the last program, but it may be a department. Right? It might be a department or so, which is established in the Office of Finance or the Prime Minister to enact privatization across the Barbados economy. BAMC was also privatized, right? Um, a lot of privatization is happening with MTW, where a lot of the road paving crews in the Ministry of Transport and Works, which traditionally build the roads in Barbados, a lot of that work is being contracted out to private contractors. So there you see Carl Williams, there you see Jada, there you see Infra, there you see Cherry, there you see all of the private contractors that are not to do roads because the Ministry of Transport and Works has been substantially privatized. That most of the operational elements are done by the private sector, although it may still be owned by government on paper. But the private sector makes the money of the state-owned enterprise. And that is a big factor right now in this current IMF program that Barbados is under. Right? We also had in that program that Barbados' tax system was overhauled. That Barbados' tax system was overhauled at the time. And the different exemptions and concessions and other loopholes which could be exploited by the wealthy were otherwise plugged up. And that you had a reduction of the maximum tax rate to 40%. And you had the elimination of most itemized allowances and deductions. You had the withdrawal of exemptions for pension income. You had taxpayers over 60 years of age could claim a tax deduction of $20,000. You had the introduction of a withholding tax on interest for 12.5%. You had the introduction of a final tax on dividends, 12.5%. You had the elimination of the stabilization tax. You had the increase of a general corporation tax up to 40%. You had the elimination of something called lower special rates. You had the elimination of excess allowances for expenditures with the exemption of credit for foreign exchange earnings and other activities related to tourism. You had a general tax rate on property which was set at 95 cents, and you had a lower tax rate of 35 cents on the first $100,000 of your property. Remember, this government changed up the tax system a lot as it relates to the application of land taxes, and a lot of persons in Barbados suffered increases in land taxes. So you see at the time, even former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford and his IMF program had a policy towards land and land taxes, and this government, having the same experience, used land taxes as a means to increase revenues coming in to help repair the IMF program that they're in. Right? So that IMF program in 1992 saw the imposition of land taxes, and the increase and the imposition of land taxes continue today. And I'm wondering if land tax will ever be abolished in Barbados, because I personally don't believe that you should buy land and then still go pay a tax on it too. Right? That deters investment. That stops poor people who get land. It reduces your ability to maintain that land, and that you gotta work to pay a land tax all the time. Right? So I believe that if you buy land, the land should be yours and you shouldn't be having to pay a tax, as land is a very important asset which can be passed on to generation to ensure that families have some type of property in the household. Uh, we had the introduction of a new income tax rate. We had the elimination of levies. We had the introduction of additional tax allowance. And we had the introduction of some other taxes, both direct and indirect. We had the proposal for value-added tax at the time. eh, They had the proposal for value-added tax at the time, and it said that the value-added tax should be levied on most goods and services supplied in or imported into Barbados, and that VAT, the tax, should fall solely on the final consumer, which is us who go in the supermarket and pay, since the business adding value would pay the value-added tax on that value less any taxes paid on imports. Right? So the VAT should be a single standard rate of 15% on all goods and services except those explicitly exempted on what they call zero rating. So during that IMF program in the 90s is when the conceptualization of VAT was determined. But I remember economist Clyde Maskell saying that value-added tax was a masterstroke by the Ornafa administration. Clearly, that was not totally accurate, as it was determined in the former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford's memoirs that his administration at the time brought forward the proposal to conceptualize value-added tax. But maybe it was the Ornafa administration that went ahead and implemented it, because at the time of the IMF program, according to his memoirs, value-added tax was on the table, and they listed different proposals that were there to implement on who VAT should be charged on, the rate, the different thresholds. And at the time, the registration for VAT was $60,000. So if you were making, these incomes roughly $60,000, that's when you had to pay VAT. I think now that threshold is up to almost $300,000, $200,000, $300,000, right? So most companies in Barbados don't pay VAT. Right? And VAT, if you remember, when this current administration came in, they wrote off over $1 billion in VAT and income tax, because the businesses were charging consumers VAT at point of sale and holding on to the VAT money and not paying the VAT money into the government coffers. Right? So then there was an attempt, given the fact that businesses were stealing the VAT, to implement what they call the National Social Responsibility Levy, or the NSRL. Right? The difference between VAT and the NSRL is that VAT is paid by the consumer. When you go and buy in the supermarket, or you go and buy a service, or you go and buy, the VAT is paid by you there. And then the businesses will then collect that VAT, and then that VAT is supposed to be paid into the government within a specific period. But no, you had businesses holding on to the VAT money for years and years and years, and the government did not go after these people who owe millions of dollars in VAT. But with the NSRL, those persons who import, the importers, the merchants, the people who were bringing it in, the container people, they had to pay NSRL upfront to clear their goods out of the ports. So therefore, the consumer did not have to pay NSRL in the supermarket. And NSRL was a way better tax for the collection of government revenues, as opposed to VAT, which is being kept by businesses and then written off as a gift by governments. So you couldn't get away from paying NSRL. Businesses could not get away from it. And therefore, it was protested against and it was ridiculed. But if you took the time to understand what was NSRL, and then you compare NSRL to value-added tax, you will see that NSRL was way better tax to collect tax revenues. as opposed to VAT. Marla Dukaran, an economist from Trinidad, has said that VAT is a regressive tax. Right? And VAT earns billions of dollars to the Barbadian economy every year. VAT collects more money than income tax and corporation tax put together. Right? One of the highest earning revenue taxes that we have is VAT. Billions VAT earns in this country, and still companies are allowed to keep and write off billions more of VAT that they refuse to pay into the government. So you understand the difference between VAT, which was introduced during the IMF program in the 90s under Prime Minister Sandiford, later implemented under former Prime Minister Oinafa, and then fast forward to the years, the person who became Minister of Finance, which was Christopher Sickler, who was the, I think, personal assistant of the former Minister of Finance, Lloyd Sandiford, he implemented the NSRL in the Barbados economy, and businesses and unions rioted against NSRL. I then heard a very large businessman standing on the floor of his supermarket saying that the high prices in the supermarket did not have anything to do with NSRL. He said that. He said that. So when we speak about a just and fair society, we are looking at a society where all and sundry would pay the required taxation that they are charged. Taxes are not just levied and charged on the lower and working classes of Barbados, but that all classes of Barbados would pay their fair share amount of taxes in this country. That's my opinion, and I think that if we do that, we're on the way to a fair and just society, according to former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford, fighting for the just society. Hey. So, my thing is, when we're speaking about Barbados in the modern context, you also need to understand the history of what occurred previously. Right? So they said that with the introduction of VAT, that consumption taxes should be removed, surcharge taxes, stamp duties, hotel and restaurant sales taxes, taxes on overseas phone calls, travel ticket taxes, taxes on pleasure cruises, taxes on sand, and taxes on clay. All of those taxes were removed for VAT. Taxes on travel came back in this current IMF program when the government put an air passenger duty on persons who travel from CARICOM and persons who travel internationally as a means and ways to finance the BDMI from a private perspective. So $90 million a year goes into financing the BDMI and its transition to a private entity. And that is being made out of air travel and persons who have to pay air passenger duty coming in and out of the Grand Adams International Airport. So in the last MF program, it was recommended that with the introduction of VAT, that travel taxes and all the other taxes and registers should be removed. But in this current MF program that we're going through under Prime Minister Mia Motley, travel taxes have returned in terms of air passenger duty that both regional and international tourists have to pay. Right? So we're comparing the IMF programs of the 1990s compared to now. Right? So, to give a fair assessment, according to the former Prime Minister, quoting his words, he said that that period was a very severe economic recession, and he said they avoided the devaluation of the Barbados dollar, and he said that it restored the financial stability to the economy and set the conditions for the resumption of real economic growth in the economy. He said they kept inflation low, and then they ushered in the historic signing of the Consensus Incomes Protocol, under which representatives of the government, employers, and workers for the first time formally agreed to a freeze on increases in basic wages and salaries, except with respect to substandard jobs and wages, exercises negotiated with job enhancement exercises and profit sharing, whatever. It brought about a number of significant institutional reforms. He said they created the Barbados Tourism Authority, they established the Privatization Unit, they established the Financial Services Unit, they established the International Business Unit, they established the Foreign Exchange Committee, they reorganized the agricultural sector, they set up the BIDC, which is the Barbados Investment and Development Council, and they developed the National Productivity Board, which is now the National Productivity Council, which was shut down by this current government. They said that they rebuilt the international reserves, and they were able to reduce the fiscal deficit, and they were able to do tax reforms both direct and indirect, remove different tax allowances, XYZ, and basically it saw the end of the reduction in public servants' wages by 8% as promised. Eh, So that economic experience essentially led to what you call a no confidence motion in the Barbados economy or and in parliament, and therefore the country went on its head and went on to elect a new government, a new prime minister, which was economist Owen Alpha, who then took on the work of the former prime minister Sandiford, and who would have, according to the cricket specialist Shirley, they say Mr. Sir Lloyd attested to the biblical stipulation: pay the tribute tax as stipulated by the emperor. So could you break this down in more layman language for me? Could you break this down in more layman language for me? Because I have an idea what it means, but I want you to break it down for the audience. What does this statement mean that he had a stipulation, pay the tribute, and pay the tax as stipulated by the emperor? Mhm. So here we have it that Barbados is going through uh IMF program. We have a new prime minister, and memoirs from the former prime minister of this country, uh, Sir Lloyd Sandiford, is articulating the different stipulations. So while Sir Lloyd was in office, he would have built some infrastructure developments around the country. So while under IMF programs, countries do embark on what we call capital works programs, and those capital works programs will essentially lead to jobs. So the largest set of capital works that occurred in Barbados is roads, was supposed to be houses in the project, COVID developments and COVID related funding and financing, and you saw the building of the accident and emergency hospital. You saw the repair the society primary school into a medical facility. You saw the repair Harrison Point into a medical facility. Uh, Best DeSantis was already built and functioning. And you saw a couple other infrastructural and capital developments being built during COVID in a bid to drive employment to be able to drive economic growth or job growth, which would essentially lead to economic growth once people spend the money back into the country. Right? So what Sir Lloyd would have done at the time infrastructurally, similar to what is happening now on the RMF program, he would have built or attempted to invest in road networks, transportation, bridges, the seaport, the airport, the power, the water, the radio, the broadcasting, the telecommunications, and public institutions such as schools, post office, prisons. Under his oversight as Prime Minister, the following infrastructural projects were undertaken. So you had the rehabilitation and reconstruction of Horse Hill, the completion of the Duncan's O'Neill Highway, as well as the Adams Barrow Cummings Highway, a road improvement program including provision of sidewalks, intersections, and road alignments. Flood works were carried out at Walton, Christchurch, Spicetown, St. Peter, and Ruby. Remember that this administration also carried out a lot of work in Spicetown as well through loans from international organizations. You see the pier at Spicetown has been repaired, and a lot of work is being done in terms of trying to do the flooding and tackle some other issues down Spicetown through loans. But I should say that the last administration, if I recall, I attended a procurement fair and those plans were already on the table and persons were being invited to bid on these projects at Spicetown or so. So when the government changed, the persons who took over just carried out what was left there. Right. So we had improvements with in access to tenantries, which was the building of houses, tenantry houses, and that funding was provided by the government of Venezuela. We had the refurbishment of bridges, which was the Chamberlain Bridge in Bridgetown and the Spicetown Bridge. And you had construction projects in the St. Cecilia Barracks, the Vendors Mall in Bridgetown, the Spicetown Bus Terminal, the East Wing of Parliament, the Immigration Building, and the Trafalgar Square redevelopment project. Right. Investment in water services. There were projects for a new airport police station, a new fire station at the airport, headquarters for the new police band, and the Hotel Public Complex, the Magistrates Court, Juvenile Court, a new judicial center. Plans for a new judicial center were drawn up and the land was acquired in Bridgetown for the center, and the extension of the shallow draft and the Barbados Shipping Registry was established. Now, a lot of these things sound very familiar. Like just the other day in Parliament, Barbados established or passed a bill in Parliament speaking to shipping and registering international ships, right? So a lot of what was happening on the former Prime Minister Sandiford and his IMF program, a lot of it is being played out now, today, under this current administration and this current IMF program. So you see the similarities. Just go and check back Parliament's debates and you will see that they were speaking about the shipping industry and the shipping registry. And here is it in his memoirs, the former Prime Minister Sandiford saying that the shallow draft. Right? The government of Barbados invested in the shallow draft. And this current government continues to invest in the shallow draft. Right? There's a $50 million loan. Not $50 million. My bad. That was for Kensington. There's a $100 million loan from the African Exim Bank to invest in the Bridgetown port. to increase its capacity in other ways. And there's also a plan to develop the beach right there by the Coast Guard base. I think that is called Brandon's. They plan to put a feed plant to facilitate the export and import of feed from right up outside of the Coast Guard base, and to put a massive car park there as well, and therefore the persons using that beach will be impacted. Okay. So right outside the Coast Guard base is going to be facilities to facilitate the import and export of feed, grains, cement, and other goods. Facilitated possibly because on the African Exim Bank's agenda is $100 million loan to invest in the Bridgetown port and the expansion of its facilities. And then on the government's agenda, there is a plan to expand outside of the Coast Guard base and even possibly move in the Coast Guard base. Right? So Lloyd Sandiford was speaking about extending the shallow draft during his time in government as Prime Minister. Currently, Barbados is speaking about extending or has extended the shallow draft as well. Right. A new judicial center in Bridgetown and magistrates courts in Bridgetown. We had the establishment of the David Simmons and Henry Ford Center in Bridgetown judicial centers. So Lloyd Sandiford invested in those type of centers during his tenure as Prime Minister. The Trafalgar Square redevelopment project. Remember that Nelson was knocked down and the entire Independence Square was reconfigured and restructured to do a nice new development, statue and monument and so on. During Sir Lloyd Sandiford's time, he had the Trafalgar Square development project, and this government had the project where they moved Nelson and restructured that area as well. Parliament is being constructed on again. Currently, I think it's the same ring again being repaired. This current government is doing it, repairing Parliament. And during Sir Lloyd Sandiford's time in office, during his IMF program, he too repaired the same wings of Parliament as well. So, Sir Lloyd Sandiford worked closely with Venezuela. Barbados is now speaking about working with Venezuela in the Petro-Caribbean deal. So you're seeing some awfully striking, some bold, in-your-face similarities to the Democratic Labour Party administration's IMF experience during Sir Lloyd Sandiford's former Prime Minister tenure versus the Mia Mottley experience and her IMF program. Almost every single infrastructure project that he did and invested in when he took the IMF's investment, the same exact experience we are going through now. So what are the striking coincidences? Any thoughts from you? Any opinions from you, viewers? Any opinions from you, viewers? Let's just remember that the National Symposium on Crime is being featured tonight. Marcia and then the others are on to the symposium. So you can find that on YouTube. But I want to also raise a tenet of labor representation and what it means to the Barbados economy, right? So it shows Tyrone, yes, that governments are a continuum. And if the plans of 30 years ago, when Barbados was in the IMF program, if you're doing the same very things 30 years later, hey, remember that times are different now. Remember that we don't have the same luxuries that we had now, right? Remember, we don't have the same luxuries that we have now, right? We don't have those same luxuries, but what I'm saying you, right? But we don't have those same luxuries going on right now in terms of financial leverage and stuff. Barbados is a country that is very much indebted, and Barbados is a country that we know the international world uh, is viewing us differently now, and the dynamics have changed. But we're trying the same things from 30 years ago, hoping that it saves us. But where's the new and innovative thinking as it relates to the IMF and it relates to Barbados? Where's the new and innovative thinking as it relates to Caribbean economies? Where's the new and innovative thinking as it relates to maneuvering financial crisis in economies if we're running the same exact playbook from 30 years ago? Right? So, Lloyd's contribution to worker upliftment. So Lloyd views that the trade union as an organization of workers and leaders for the purpose of negotiating wages and working conditions at the workplace, helping to settle the grievances of workers, raising demands on behalf of workers, regulating relations between workers and employers, pursuing collective action to enforce the outcomes of collective bargaining. He unequivocally postulates that workers have the rights of freedom to associate and the right to engage in collective bargaining and the right to take industrial action and the right to employment free from discrimination and the right not to be forced into compulsory labor. And during that period, Saloy has never been an anti-worker prime minister, and the measures that he would have rolled out as a prime minister, according to his memoirs, stipulate that during the 1960s and onwards that he contributed significantly to the democratization of education, providing access to the fruits and further better education of Barbadians, which would have established the hotel school, or what you call Palmarine, the SJPP, we call the Polytechnic, the BCC, Community College, the Skills Training Program, and he strongly supported the establishment of the Barbados Workers Union Labour College, which he himself opened and which received its first subvention of $10,000 from the government in 1974 to 75 through the Ministry of Education, when Sir Lloyd was Minister of Education. And that subvention was raised by the Barbados Labour Party to $20,000 in 1978 to 79, but then it was lowered by the Barbados Labour Party again to $15,000 in 1985 to 1985. And then when Sir Lloyd became Minister of Education, he raised the subvention to $30,000 in 1987, and then he further raised it to $40,000 in 1989 to 90. And the Barbados Workers Union was experiencing considerable financial worries at the time. And during the period of 1980 and 90, Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, he further supported the work of the Labour College by allocating $615,000 out of the training levy to that institution, and the NUPW and the training programs of the employers body also received allocations and subvention in an even-handed manner. So it seems Sir Lloyd here was also very big on financially supporting the unions. Okay. So the former Prime Minister of Barbados, Sir Lloyd Sandiford, was very big into providing financial support for trade unions. Right, as I just discussed the thing about subventions. Fast forward to today in the modern Barbados economy. Right, the current Prime Minister of Barbados ran uh, the head of the Barbados Workers Union, the same union here that would have received subvention increases from both administration, BLP and DLP, BWU. The General Secretary of the BWU is a candidate in the Barbados Labour Party, the government in St. George. So there you have it, in that financial benefits from government continue to be allocated to unions, trade unions, and I can see the question on as to where do you draw the line as it relates to a merger between governments and trade unions, where in a modern economy the head of the BWU is in parliament on the government's benches, having resigned from the Senate as an independent senator to then go and run for a seat on the government's benches. Hey. So while being the head of the BWU, the General Secretary manages more than $40,000 plus. And this was since 1990. They said that the subvention was raised to $40,000 in the year of 1990. And I don't know how it has been increased since then, between 1990 to 2024. But you're saying $40,000 plus in control of the Barbados Workers Union according to 1990 figures, in addition to the parliamentary salary of the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union. So you see what it is all about when it comes to persons who may enter into trade union leadership, especially the large unions who receive government subvention. How easy it is to cross the Rubicon from being a trade union leader, or a general secretary, or president into the political sphere. Right? Very easy. Very, very, very easy to do. Based off the fact that most trade union leaders come into contact with the government, based off the fact that governments provide a subvention to the moderately large unions. Right? Happened, Sir Lloyd Sandiford was very kind to the unions. Mayor Motley, very kind to the unions. According to Alternate Views, the book, former Prime Minister Frondel Stewart was marched against by all trade unions, including the NUPW, including the BWU, including the PUT. Hey. So the former leader, Mr. Stewart, he was marched against by the unions and asking for a 23% wage increase, knowing that it was unpractical. But again, I keep making the point about trade union leadership and its ties to governments. Hey. So by focusing on the trade unions at that time, the former Prime Minister would have ventured into that realm, and he would have made some temporary posts made permanent in the public service. So therefore that would solidify your tenure as a leader. You know, if you could assure people get permanent jobs in the public sector, more and more temporary posts became permanent. Some casual posts also became permanent. And persons generally had an increase in job security at the time based off the relationship that the former Prime Minister Sandiford had with the unions. So he had a good relationship with them, right? Because he was getting people put in permanent work, he was solidifying them in the public service, offering them job security, financial security, seeing about their futures. And that should be the basis of a relationship between a trade union and a government. Not that a trade union should team up with the government to sabotage the government to cut the workers' throat, where you would protest the government for 23%, but then when the government change, you accept 4%. And then you accept 4% and then go into parliament and oversee 3 separate pay raises for parliamentarians under your tenure, inclusive of the point of a senior minister, where ministers in this country were, and a post was created called senior minister, and a senior minister is paid at the same level. When you check the parliamentary scales and salaries, is paid at the same level of the deputy prime minister, but they don't have the same workload. So you essentially have 5 or 6 more deputy prime ministers that get paid, but just don't have the title. So that is what union reps nowadays have been overseeing. Union reps nowadays have been overseeing the sale of our airport. No, let me correct me, not sale, but the leasing out of the Grand Llanos International Airport, right? The leasing out. Then you're seeing the seaport also coming up for discussion. Look at the treatment of the sanitation workers. Look at the workers at the Barbados Revenue Authority being treated poorly. Look at the treatment of the nurses. Look at the treatment of public servants. So the merger of government and trade union leadership is working against the population. But if you read the memoirs of former PM Sandiford, the relationship that he had with the unions was more cohesive and beneficial to that of the workers, and therefore the population would have felt more comfortable at the time with that merger, as opposed to the current merger that we have between the 2 massive unions, the NUPW and the BW in Barbados, and the government. Right. So tell me if these things stand out to you. Tell me if the reference between what happened during Sandiford times, for those persons who are senior enough to remember, and the discussion now and the correlation to the IMF program, what is happening now, if you can create the linkages, if you follow the cross references between now, 30 years ago, 30 years later, same very things happening. So has Barbados as a country really grown? If we're trying to do the same things that we tried to do 30 years ago, if we're trying to do them 30 years later, right? So we continue to practice the same thing over and over. We had, after 1991, 92, we had an election. We had 15 years or 14 years of Oinafa. Then we had David Thompson for a short while. Then we had Mr. Fernando Short for about 8 years. And then we have Mayor Motley. But the cycle, although we had all of these prime ministers, the cycle and the issue still remains the same for the Barbadian people, regardless of who prime minister we put there, which party we put there. We are back in the same place that we were 30 years ago, but with much worse circumstances. At that time, we didn't have an oversized public service. At that time, our wage bill was not as overgrown as it is was then and it is now. At that time, we didn't have all of this borrowed reserves, and at that time, we were not as indebted as we were now. People were still willing to lend us money. The only person willing to lend us money now are the IMF and the African Exim Bank, the Chinese. But the options are not that many. Like, so 30 years later, I ain't saying 5 years later, I ain't saying 10 years later, but I am 29 years old of age, and I am going to be 30 years old this year. And these things occurred probably 2, 3, 4 years the maximum before I was born. So 30 plus years later, we're back here trying to solve a problem that we tried to deal with 30 years ago. Right. So I want to focus on another aspect of the former Prime Minister's memoirs. So for those persons who may not know, this is where I am quoting from, Fighting for the Just Society, former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford's memoirs, Fighting for a Just Society. Right. So I want to give another shout out again to the panelists who went on the National Symposium on Crime. Um, thank you very much for tuning in. We're going to try to get some clips from it shortly. Um, and let us have some greater discussion. Right? So, yeah, so in a just society, or fighting for a just society, our former Prime Minister, Sir Lloyd Sandiford, who obviously had to battle the IMF, as was said, um, during that period. And I want to give you this justification. Eh, I want to give you this justification, right, which was articulated, and it said that the IMF, the government of Barbados, entered into intense discussion with the IMF concerning the Barbados economic policy program supported by the IMF and the national political will to effectively implement the program. And the program was placed before the cabinet on at least 11 times. By 1991 September, under the resolute leadership of Sir Lloyd, such a program was devised based off some particular macroeconomic objectives. Those objectives were, for this IMF program at the time, that there should be no change in the exchange rate or the parity, Barbados dollar, and negative growth in the Barbados economy should be stopped, that inflation should be reduced and contained, that the external position, which is Barbados' reserves, should be rebuilt to at least 3 months, and that tourism should be the main engine of growth. This is 1991, people, remember that. And that the government should reduce its deficit, and that there should be reforms leading to increased productivity, competitiveness, restrain income policies, whoa, whoa, restrain income policies, and a more effective and direct tax system, the streamlining of the public sector, Social Security Operations, meaning NAS. Right? So even back then, there were discussions around Social Security and NAS during that IMF program. And in this particular IMF program, pension reform was big. We had a massive increase in the pension age in Barbados. And eventually we'll get to 72 years. And the increase in pension age has not been discussed extensively, and the impacts that it will have on the Barbados economy, because they're creating bottlenecks in the public service where younger persons with degrees and other experiences will be unable to get jobs because they're keeping senior people in the public service for much longer. I understand that you're trying to focus on the national insurance and the NAS and protecting the NAS. But if the government and governments of Barbados stop using the NAS as a piggy bank and stop borrowing money and refusing to pay back, then the NAS will not be in a problem. Had this administration not restructured the debt and put Barbados under one of the most draconian debt restructurings in the world, then there would have not been a need to restructure and reform the NAS. Our smart government also decided to do an actuary review, meaning that the person who did the analysis on the pension scheme, as you know, the actuary is a person who will study pension plans and those type of things. They called for an actuary review in the middle of COVID, after they now shell out all of the money out to the NAS, severance payments, unemployment, all types of benefits. They slush out the NAS and then did a review on the NAS when it was broke. So how could you do a review on an institution when you just spend all the money and break it and expect it to show that it is doing well? So COVID was used as an excuse to shell the NAS out of its money and then restructure it based off the conditions of an IMF program. And there you have it. So Lloyd Sandiford saying back in 1991 that they intended the streamlining and strengthening of the public sector and social security operations. The NAS was reformed to the National Insurance Social Security Service, NISSS. And here is people featured in the memoirs of former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford telling you about it. And the same exact thing occurred in Barbados' current IMF program, where Barbados reformed to the NISSS, changed the pension age, increased penalties on persons who want to retire early from the public service, increased contributions, all in line with IMF targets. Do you understand, viewers, alternate viewers, what is being played out in front of your eyes economically and the different changes to the structure of the Barbados economy? I just laid the facts out clearly for you. So tell me, alternate viewers, what do you think so far? Let me hear your opinion. Let me hear your opinion. Right. Let me hear what you think about Sir Lloyd Sandiford's experience. What do you think about Barbados's IMF experience? What do you think about Mia Morley's IMF experience? And 30 years from now, what do you think will be the experience of a future Prime Minister of Barbados? Hearing this information tonight, what should he or she think 30 years from now? What does he or she, a future prime minister, a future leader, future policy advisor, a future global economist, a future global lawyer, a future global thinker, and you're planning for the future of Barbados, a future diplomat, future ambassador, hearing this information tonight. 30 years from now, will we be having this same exact discussion? Will we be trying the same things that Sir Lloyd Sandiford did, and that would have been 60 years ago? So I hope you're seeing what is happening here, people. I hope you're seeing what is happening here. I say that we are trapped in a cycle. Right? We are trapped in a cycle. We are trapped in a cycle. So let me read some of what Sir Lloyd proposed to be economic reforms, a series of economic reforms to correct the chronic and other ailments in the Barbados economy. Right? The former Prime Minister is saying here, and he tried to establish the Security Exchange Commission, and he said that we cannot say that our financial system has not come of age until it can effectively perform the function of financial intermediation on a systemic and organized basis by mobilizing savings and other funds from various savers and redirecting and allocating them to investors. Doesn't that sound very familiar to you? Didn't we hear the leader of Barbados constantly speaking about the savings in the commercial banks and the billions of dollars that we have earning no interest, and how the Prime Minister will love Barbadians to invest in our country? And Sir Lloyd Sandiford is saying the same exact thing in the 90s. And I'm going to repeat it for you, because the modern day announcement by this current Prime Minister is that Barbados was attempting to form a junior stock exchange. And that went out to the window. We never heard anything much about that. Then they tried to establish this digital banking services or whatever. Then they created BOSS. And they're attempting to create all types of institutions, financial institutions. They created all types of digital banks and so on. And so Lloyd Sandiford as his policy option to assist Barbadians in mobilizing their savings. So what does that tell us about Barbadians? That Barbadians have traditionally been passive in terms of investing the savings into these financial intermediaries. Right? So he established the Securities Exchange, and that could basically end up being the stock exchange in the modern day era. And Barbados wanted to establish a junior stock exchange based off the manifesto of the BLP. And you hear the word mobilizing savings and other funds from various savers and redirecting and allocating them to investors. The Prime Minister currently, Myanmar, always says the same exact words. So how ironic it is that former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford has been saying it since the 90s, and today Myanmar is repeating the same exact verbiage. And the common thing amongst them both is that they were on the IMF programs, both of them. So how we're seeing the commonality there, right? Yes, Pedro. Well, I mean, we could have populists, we could have globalists, we could have nationalists, but we need people who think large, not just in a silo of 166, but all across the world, the diaspora everywhere, with the focus on Barbados the core of it. But we need both globalists, populists, people who think, far away. So let me go on to speak about commonalities again. So Lloyd Sandiford, former Prime Minister, is saying that he wished to see a wider distribution of share ownership, a process he will later call economic enfranchisement. Economic enfranchisement. Marshall Capital economist always speaks about economic enfranchisement. Included in the manifesto of the BLP is thoughts about economic enfranchisement. Included in the verbiage of the Prime Minister is always speech about economic enfranchisement. So if you were thinking that these terms were new, and if you thought that the Barbados economic and recovery transformation was new, no, it was not new. If you thought economic enfranchisement was new, no, it was not new. Barbados were discussing these issues. If you thought climate change was new, no, it was not new. Former Prime Minister Sandiford were discussing these things during his tenure as Prime Minister, and this was before he was born. So Barbados is still caught in that realm, in that world, 30 years later. So how can we move on? Is the question that any person seeking leadership, any person seeking a position of influence to help guide Barbados, the question needs to be asked: why are we 30 years later still having the same chronic problems? And how can we move on and get over them? That is important. And all the persons on here should ask prospective candidates and prospective politicians that same question. Right. So economic enfranchisement. So we hear and we know where Marshall Capital economist gets that slogan from. And we see it on the platforms of the BLP. So there we have the BLP taking a lot of language and a lot of policies and a lot of structures from the former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford's time during government. Right? This is almost a carbon copy, and I read the proof that you can hear it. Right? So, some more reforms. Some more reforms, right? Some people may like this, some may not like this. But in 1986, Sir Lloyd Sandiford would have, when he was Deputy Prime Minister, would have given $30 million in concessions to the private sector, which went to manufacturing and to tourism sectors, right? So the Democratic Labour Party during that period was very supportive of the private sector, right? So these are capitalist gestures. People tend to say that the Democratic Labour Party, which I am, a proud member and supporter, people will say that the Democratic Labour Party tends to be more for the working class, but then there are constant examples where the Democratic Labour Party would have also supported the private sector in their endeavors equally. Because you got balance. You got to support the working class, and you also got to support capital. So, you have to have a fair balance. Fighting for just society. The rich can't get all, the poor can't get all. It got to be fair and balanced across the board, So you have examples of where the private sector, and a person was saying to me yesterday that it's his opinion that the private sector of Barbados is the biggest recipient of welfare, much worse than people who go down to welfare on a real life. Like that the private sector is one of the biggest recipients of welfare. Right? Yes, borrow. I see the poor can't get none. But the poor has to get some, you know. Poor has to get some. But you have to be equally yoked. And you have to reward people who take risks. So the entrepreneur, the people who go and try to procure capital, people who take risk, they also have to reward those persons. So you also had here where, and I highlighted that example about supporting the private sector because in a modern day time, this government has been a heavy supporter of the private sector, right? We had the writing off of taxes, $1 billion in fat income tax. That was a heavy subsidy to the private sector, right? We had the deferral of severance payments, heavy subsidy to the private sector. We had the softening of labor and employment laws to suit the private sector. Again, more subsidy. Right? We have the government implementing taxes, which goes almost straight to financing private sector operations. So you have a heavy flow of, and using back the slogan that my friend used, the welfare being the private sector being a welfare recipient, receiving heavy government subsidy, a heavy government bailout. Like government bailed out First Caribbean Bank by using the national insurance to buy shares in First Caribbean Bank through the national insurance. That is called a government bailout. Right? And it shows government's regard for the private sector and how they would subsidize private sector investment and lifestyles. Right? So we had some additional measures which say that in 1991 and 92, he placed a number of ongoing capital projects on hold and he postponed the start of some new projects in order to curb the propensity of the government to spend exorbitantly. Right? And the foregoing measures were wrongheadedly and harshly criticized as being too punitive and being too severe, but yet the balance of payments continue to deteriorate. So persons criticize the measures as being too severe. Right? A situation occurred in Barbados during that period of Sandiford to help thwart. And I hear the former representative for St. Lucie, Dennis Kelman, constantly speaking. And sometimes when Kelman speaks, you get some little nuggets from. I constantly heard him speaking about this bullet loan from Japan, right? This bullet loan from Japan, where Barbados borrowed a $5 billion yen bond in bullet loans in the Japanese market for a 5-year term, which was borrowed by the Barbados Labour Party in February of 1985, and it was defrayed through the one-time repayment of a $68 million repayment in February 1990 and another repayment of $65 million. And another $65 million bullet loan was placed on the same Japanese market for a 5-year time by the then finance minister in September 1986, which was due for a one-time repayment in 1990. So let me repeat that again. A $5 billion bullet loan was placed on the Japanese market for a 5-year term by the Barbados Labour Party government in February 1985. And you had to repay it with a one-time payment through February of 1990. So by February of 1990, Sir Lloyd Sandiford would have been in government because our Barrow would have passed and he would have been prime minister. So you had a bullet loan borrowed on the Japanese market by the Barbados Labour Party in 1985, but then Sir Lloyd had to repay this bullet loan as a one-time payment in February of 1990. And then they had to borrow another bullet loan in September of 1986, which was then due for repayment in 1991. So you had two massive loans to repay, right, during that period. But I slowed down and focus on that part that the bees borrowed, because let me be real, any government taking up government after this government has to look for billions of dollars to repay the IMF and repay interest on all of these loans, right? So the next government coming in will have a problem similar to what former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford experienced in terms of having to repay all of these foreign loans and in quick succession, right? So that Japanese bullet loan had the government under some pressure, and Barbados was so called running out of foreign reserves at the time, and people did not want to lend us money, right? So Mr. Sandiford recalled that the IMF existed and that the IMF could provide the loan resources with longer grace periods and lower interest rates and more extended maturity dates than capital markets, right? But he also knew that countries borrowing from the IMF would be required to correct certain things that were wrong. And he therefore decided that to utilize the IMF, he would utilize the IMF in order to get, hear the term, breathing space. That is another slogan that the Prime Minister of Barbados constantly likes to use. Elbow room and breathing space. Terminology is used on the former Prime Minister Sandiford, right? So, by July of 1991, the government of Barbados was lock, stock, and barrel. Well, by July 1991, there were discussions, but by September 1991, we were lock, stock, and barrel straight into the IMF. So the repayments of those bullet loans, as Lemuel Tull is saying, triggered the repayment of that 8% cut, which led us into going into the IMF program. And I hear Dennis Kelman constantly speaking his story about these Japanese bullet loans during the period and the impact that it had on the Barbados economy during that period. So I hope you guys are enjoying the history and the modern lesson and the blend between the past and the current, and seeing what we need to do given that Barbados seem to have wasted 30 years of government to be back in the same position that we were in 30 years ago, but much worse off. Two loans crippled the Barbados economy during that time. So imagine now that for a country that has 32 active loans with the IDB alone, compared to the other loans that you have with the CDB and the IMF and the Latin American Development Bank, Barbados has close to 50 active loans, but two loans crippled Barbados during the 1990s. Right? So, I hope you guys are understanding what I'm saying. I hope you guys can start to prepare your children's minds for the realities that we face. Right? And Sir Lloyd Sandiford, former Prime Minister, is saying that leadership is not merely the function of an imposing title held, but the creative use of which positional power is put, says Sir Lloyd, and he continues that leadership is the activity, ability to influence others and to enlist their support in accomplishing desired goals and objectives. It is rooted in qualities acquired through a continual process of education, experience, and training, and it involves the method of trial and error. Says the person who hasn't made mistakes has never made anything. And there can be no leaders without followers, and no followers without belief, trust, and confidence in a leader. And the leader must know him or herself. And Dennis Law always quotes that in his book. We spoke to that extensively on the journey. And it says, know the situation, know the followers, and know how to communicate values and visions of the heart. People are sometimes proclaimed as leaders, but it is at times difficult to pinpoint what they actually did, achieved, or stood for. And this is certainly not true of Sir Lloyd, and no one can say without justification that he did nothing, for his record abundantly refutes any assertion. Right. He also speaks to character and personality and says that character is the combination of the attributes that distinguishes one individual from another, and personality is the embodiment of a person's character as exhibited in the observable behavior and temperament of that person. So Lloyd may be described as a stable, conscientious, independent, and introverted, and competent personality. He is studious, reflective, trustworthy, humble, but at the same time he is resolute, determined, and tenacious. He's hardworking, diligent, meticulous, but also courageous, loyal, protective, placid, but not complacent. He does not suffer fools gladly, and he acts with a prudence and firmness, always seeking to do the right thing in the right way. His guiding principles are love, peace, justice, democracy, development, altruism, tolerance, and unselfishness. And no person is perfect, he says, but we can all reach out for perfectibility. Born under the zodiac sign of Aries, the Sir Lloyd heads directly towards the purpose in hand. See that term purpose coming in again? Utilizing his original organizing abilities and self-confidence to that end. A practicing Anglican, he believes that sinful humankind is redeemed through the mercies of a forgiving God and the sacrifice of his Son, Jesus Christ. So you see, alternate views is tying the past to the present to the future, tying topics of economic, society, politics, law, business, life, all together. And tonight's discussion, in giving comparison to the experience of the former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford, making the direct linkages between the IMF program now and the IMF program of yesteryear, and the fact that what we were attempting 30 years ago, we are attempting now, provided with the evidence to show that what we are saying was directly accurate as it relates to our analysis on Sir Lloyd and our analysis on the Barbados economy. So, my people, let me take in some comments from you. Clayton is saying that this session is very educational. Square 4 is saying that when I hear Marshall Cattle with the words economic enfranchisement, I know that only person in the house who uses to use those words where the late Sir Lloyd didn't understand what he means. Let me tell is saying the bullet loan is what caused the 8% cut. Femi is saying correct. If I was a party, I really would not want the next election, just have a proper opposition. Hurricane Red is saying I remember the bullet loan from Japan, Barbados was under pressure. Timmy is saying totally agree, concessions. Hurricane Red is saying here is a parting of the ways. Economic enfranchisement under Sandy is not economic enfranchisement on the map. Look at the land and business deals today, join the dots. Now, Hurricane Red, this is a very interesting comment here, and I have to respond to this one. Because during the time of Sir Lloyd Sandiford, former Prime Minister, uh, there was a bill called the Investment Sector Bill, which was rolled out by the IDB, right? The IDB and the Investment Sector Bill is what allows land to be sold. And remember, when after having a slogan called allowing land to fetch its highest value, right? You remember that? Allowing land to fetch its highest value. And ONAFA changed the zoning policies of Barbados, the land zoning policies, and regraded the lands of Barbados. And through that investment sector bill, which was for measly chump change, 30 something million dollars chump change, that was the beginning of selling out of lands in Barbados, where all of the big plantations were sold out to international brands to build hotels, to build golf courses, to build $1 million houses during that period. What is interesting about this investment sector bill that was placed in front of Sir Lloyd Sandiford is that he did not sign it. It was also placed in front of David Thompson as Minister of Finance. He also did not sign the investment sector bill, which opened up Barbados to allow real estate to be sold for foreign currencies. So if a property in Barbados, as you know, the market in Barbados, a lot of the properties are priced in US. Like, that investment sector bill made it extremely plausible for international investors to come in and buy all the prime agricultural land. So townland country planning permissions were given out to build on properties. The time it took to do planning permissions was drastically cut because the government was trying to rush forward to be able to collect this newfound investments. Right? So that is how you saw the emergence of all these big hotels and all these big multi-million-dollar houses and all these big tourism type properties that came in under the ONAFA period through the investment sector bill. But Sir Lloyd refused to sign it because they believed that it was too intrusive and that it would price Barbadians out of the house and land market. And so it did. Check it out, people. The investment sector bill of the IDB for the 1990s Barbados. Sir Lloyd Sandiford didn't sign it. David Thompson didn't sign it. But ONAFA and the Barbados Labour Party signed it. And that gave the emergence to all of these golf courses and big houses and big plots of land, which were sold out during that period. The investment sector bill. So, as was said, Hurricane Writer, what is enfranchisement under Sir Lloyd Sandiford, former Prime Minister, is not the same as economic enfranchisement under the current Prime Minister in Motley, because they have a very liberal and free-handed approach as it relates to the sale of prime real estate and lands in Barbados, which is not very nationalistic or patriotic, but they have a preference for international, more globalist type investment, where foreign currency is the first priority as it relates to transactions. So international investors will take priority as it relates to buying up lands because they have the foreign exchange, while you'll be buying in Barbadian currency. Yes, so in Westmoreland and all these projects that went up during that time, these fancy golf course type investments, Timmy, you have it correct. Timmy, you have it correct. So, let me start to bring it home. And I want to quote from this book, so Lloyd Sandiford's book. He says that Barbados has over the years been a relatively open economy and a net importer of goods and services. Our need to import substantially to maintain our standard of living and to service the manufacturing and distributing sectors from time to time has placed severe pressure on our balance sheet payments. He went on to say at another date, speaking at the St. Michael's School, my alma mater, and he made the Barbadian public aware of the disturbing difficulties with the balance of payments and the reserves. And he said that one major area that we as a people have problems is in the area of balance of payments and reserves. And this has been a current chronic problem through our history as an independent nation, to the extent that in 1982 the Barbados Labour Party went to the IMF to borrow funds under a standby agreement. The truth of the matter is that we are not earning, and we have never earned enough from our exports to pay for the goods and services we import. So Sir Lloyd Sandiford is telling Barbados and Barbadians all of that time ago that we do not earn enough from our exports to pay for our goods and services. We still have that problem right now, and much worse, because we have to be borrowing reserves and borrowing foreign exchange to be constantly topping up reserves to pay for the goods and services that Barbadians consume every day. Right? So there you have Sir Lloyd Sandiford saying that to you all of that time, right? And what Barbados is doing different. Yes. But I want to make a slight divergence, right? Um, to show a screen. Tell me if you can see. Trying to get a bit of the thing on the screen that you can see it. Um, we just wanted to take in, as was promised. Yeah, as was promised, some of the national dialogue on crime. Yeah, but that is not functioning as we would like. The technology is not allowing us to do what we want to do. So let us move on. But yes, my people, we are up at 9:18. So we are winding down. So I want to know your thoughts tonight about Barbados fighting for the just society. What do you think about us fighting for the just society? And what do you think about the analysis and the memoirs of former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford, who's saying on the cover of this book that sow a good seed today and in due season you will reap a rich reward? What do you think about Sir Lloyd? What do you think about what he said? What do you think about Barbados's experience? Again, let us acknowledge the efforts to tackle the crime problem in Barbados through the National Symposium. I was hoping to get some of the clips going on, but we know how the technology and how it functions. Um, But nevertheless, so I hope you tuned on to the symposium. We had a very good panel. You had Marcia Weeks on there. You had Lumumba Batson on there, Derek Allen, and some other panelists. So I hope you get to view that as well. But tell me, alternate viewers, what is your analysis as a taxpayer, as a man, as a woman, as a mother, as a grandmother, living through that experience and comparing it to now, the similarities, the fact that we're in a much worse position as a country 30 years later. We still have the same problems, indebted country, a shackling education system, leaders who seem not to care. So we have a set of chronic issues facing Barbados. And those chronic issues, as was spoken on the show, still exist as they did 30 years ago and probably further back. They still exist in 2024. So 25, 26 years from now, when it's 2050, will we be having the same exact discussions, but next time with a devalued Barbados dollar? So is that the direction we're heading, given that we've signed two IMF programs? We signed two IMF programs, 2018 and 2022. We're indebted to the IMF to the tune of $759 million that we owe to the IMF. But I want to speak to the vision for Barbados. And this vision was expounded by Sir Lloyd Sandiford in the back of his book. And it says, Vision for Barbados. When I look down the vistas of history, down the decades of time not yet unfolded, I envision a Barbados that has evolved into a truly educated society. I envision a society that respects environmentally the physical condition of our lands, its vegetation, animal species, the waters on and around about it, and its atmosphere. I envision a society of healthful people who, through their lifestyles and efforts, seek to prevent disease, protect, and promote health. I envision a society sustained by the highest possible levels of literacy, on which is based on a comprehensive curriculum and body of learning experiences for living and for livelihood, implemented through a continuing network of formal and non-formal and informal settings. I envision a society that promotes the integration of drama and dance, music and art into the fabric of daily living. I envision a society practicing the process of democracy, protecting human rights, promoting orderly and disciplined behavior, and ensuring violence, crime, and all forms of lawlessness through an enlightened criminal justice system. I envision a society in which our citizens earn a satisfying standard of living achieved by dedicated, high quality work for which they are adequately rewarded. I envision a society in which the young, the old, the weak, the disabled, the sick, the disadvantaged, and the underprivileged are cared for in a concerned and caressing network of social support. I envision a society that takes its place among the developed countries of the world in the shortest space of time. I envision a society which maintains its loyalty and sovereignty to the motherland of Barbados. but which at the same time embraces our brothers and sisters in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Grenada, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, Saint Kitts, Anguilla, Montserrat, Bahamas, Jamaica, Cayman Islands, Turks and Caicos, and in Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago as the natural patrimony of the new confederations of Caribbean people. But for that new society to come into being, certain developments must take place now. The seeds of the future are already implanted in the present time. End quote. Sir Lloyd Erskine Sandiford. Sounds like a true statesman. Sounds like something John F. Kennedy would say about his country. And I felt like a patriot reading a statement by former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford. And I often wonder, where are the type of leaders like this who make these profound and very impactful statements and quotes to their people? You know, the language and the verbiage the leaders have changed to a much more aggressive, divisive rhetoric, where it is the politicians versus the people, and that should never be so. So, into clarifying the vision, putting purpose into life, the Right Honorable Lloyd Erskine Sandiford is saying that it is my belief that both in our nature and heredity and in our nature, our environment, they are built-in agents for change. Our life is therefore guided and dominated by change, by the potential for growth, development, and change. Each one of us has the potential for change, change for better or change for worse, change for good or change for evil, change for progress, change for retrogression. I wish to see a future for our country based on the unfolding of greater liberty and freedom for the individual and a greater commitment to the social responsibility and service to the nation. I wish to see a future for our country based on a greater production and productivity and higher levels of employment. I wish to see a country in which there is no exploitation, no alienation, in which brother does not raise the hand of violence against brother, in which sister does not encourage sister to live a life of drugs and crime and lawlessness. And I wish to see us build this new society, not for some of our citizens, but for all of our citizens. And I just have to give a round of applause for such deep and profound words from a very astute leader that we had, Sir Lloyd Sandiford. And we spoke extensively about his experience as Prime Minister of Barbados, his IMF experience. Then we gave analysis. We gave analysis about his character, about his leadership, what he believed. We took quotes from what he said. We read excerpts from his book, from his memoirs, and we shared extensively about his experience, well correlating it to the modern day economic experience of Barbados. So, there ends my evening session. So, I want to thank you all very much for tuning in. I want to thank Mr. Barrow, who is sending me WhatsApps and other persons for tuning in. Um, I appreciate you. Give a shout out to all Square 4, Hurricane Writer, Pedro Gemma, Lemuel Tell, Tyrone Nurse, Timmy Irahan, Annette Wood. Good night to you, Shirlene Clark, saying that this episode is very educational, helping us to appreciate realistic planning, policy, and practice of implementation. A Barbadian like Sir Lloyd and you, Mr. Stewart, they are creative citizens. Right. the Square Foot asking saying that it would mean that either PM Adams or PM Bree St. John who went for those bullet loans. Correct me if I am wrong. Well, I can't remember who was Prime Minister of Barbados in 1985. But I do know that the Barbados Labour Party was in, but I don't know if it was. Uh, I think former Prime Minister Adams would have died by then. I think so. I can't recall, but I could be wrong. But you know that nothing that a nice Google search can't fix. Yeah, so Clyde Yvonne, thank you very much for tuning in. Uh, Appreciate you guys. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow to the Marcia Weeks program at 7 p.m. You should be on there as well. And don't forget to give the National Symposium on Crime a watch on the opposition leaders page, the opposition leader Barbados' page. That National Symposium on Crime should be featured. So you can go on there and view that as well. We didn't have a massive crowd this evening because we didn't advertise and we didn't market as heavy. But we will do so from next week and advertise early. So you might be in for a couple of surprises. So thank you all very much. We had two shows this week. We had the show on Tuesday with the Caribbean Progress Studies Institute with Mr. Rashid Griffith. That was a very good show. I learned a lot um, about this African PM system. So I encourage you guys to go back and watch that. And also you can rewatch this program as well and let us discuss, because I realize that many of you don't comment much here, but when you see me in person, you have a lot to say about the things that I say on the show. So I thank you for that engagement. Let us continue to have these non-judgmental and non-partisan discussion, but more policy and looking at what's best for Barbados, regardless of political affiliation or colors. Because look at it, 30 years later, we are still the same place. We've had government after government, and we are back in the same place as we were, but much worse off than we were during that period. So don't forget to like everybody. Don't forget to share. Don't forget to send this important program. We have B's on here. We have D's on here. We have independents on here. We have economists on here. We have lawyers on here. We have bankers. We have sanitation workers. We have fishermen on here. We have all of my people from St. John, all of my people from the city, my people from St. George, the US, Sir Alfred Benjamin, the UK, Europe, South America. We have an audience from all over the globe. So we just want to acknowledge our audience tonight, the loyal patrons who made Alternative Views what it is. We've had a very fruitful discussion tonight, and our discussion solely focused on fighting for the just society, autobiography by former Prime Minister Sir Lloyd Sandiford, and we correlated what was in this book to some excerpts from Alternative Views. I had to quote Alternative Views because I could roll it off my head. We took some excerpts from Alternative Views, and we took some real-time information to quote events that occurred, economic events along the way. So, gratitude, audience. Greetings. Have a really good night. Have a safe night. Wish your families well. I wish you well. I wish you all the best of health and prosperity. I gone now. Goodbye.